We begin the day with U.S. President Trump's deportation campaign in Minneapolis, a change in leaders and a change of tone. Trump says that, quote, things are going very nicely for his border czar, Tom Homan, who has arrived in Minnesota. Today, Homan met Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz, who again called for impartial investigations into the Minneapolis shooting deaths by federal agents. Homan is replacing Border Control official Greg Bovino, who left Minneapolis following the most recent fatal shooting of a civilian by federal officials. Now, that shooting sparked mass public outrage. Video of the fatal encounter has gone viral, and it appears to contradict the U.S. federal government's account of the shooting. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey says some federal agents will now start leaving the city as anger continues to grow over last weekend's killing.
Tributes left to the late Alex Pretti at the scene in Minneapolis where he was shot dead by US federal agents on Saturday. The subdued setting sits in stark contrast to ongoing protests held throughout the city following the latest death of a resident at the hands of agents. Pretti's killing comes just weeks after the fatal shooting of fellow US citizen Renee Good.
It's disgraceful. They shouldn't be murdering people for protesting, and Alex did nothing wrong. Neither did Renee Good. They just got caught right in the middle of how ICE is treating everyone horribly around here.
I cannot sit idly by while our country changes from what it was, a democracy, into an authoritarianism, fascist government. I can't sit idle.
Footage of Pretti's killing was recorded on video and spread online. While government officials insist the killing was lawful, critics are demanding a full-scale investigation into the agent's actions. A federal judge in Minnesota is set to decide whether to essentially shut down the Trump administration's immigration crackdown on Minnesota. District Judge Catherine Menendez heard cases from both sides on Monday. However she rules, the outcome could have far-reaching consequences.
What is decided in Minnesota overall, this case and everything that we're doing to try to protect our state has great ramifications for the rest of the country.
Intensive care nurse Alex Pretti was just 37 years old.
And we can speak now to Kerlikowske. He's a former commissioner of US Customs and Border Protection under the Obama administration, and he joins us today from Charleston, South Carolina. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir. Thank you for joining us today. Minnesota officials are saying that federal agents blocked them from the scene where Alex Pretti was killed. Is that unusual? I mean, federal authorities keeping local investigators out?
Yeah, it's very unusual when a federal agent uses deadly force. It's routine for a joint investigation involving federal authorities, but also local authorities. That's important for transparency, and it's important for trust in local law enforcement.
So, what would a credible, transparent investigation need to include?
The FBI would have opened up what we call a criminal civil rights investigation. It might not lead to criminal charges, but the investigation would be thorough. There would also be an investigation by the federal authorities to see if the use of force was within compliance of their rules and regulations. And they would join in and have the local authorities, whether it's the district attorney or the state or the city police department, to be able to share, coordinate, and communicate on that investigation.
In both the death of Renee Good and Alex Pretti just a few days ago, federal officials framed the two people who were shot and killed as posing a threat, yet bystander video contradicts those claims. How do you view the way that these incidents have been handled and communicated? You just mentioned the importance of communication.
Well, I think that we saw the videos of the shooting of the mother and the poet, Renee Good, and then we saw the videos around the world of the shooting of Alex Pretti. Then they listened to what the president, his deputy chief of staff, the secretary of Homeland Security, all the things that they said. And each time, as the American public looks at those videos, they see that what they're being told by their government officials is not what actually occurred. And now, of course, there's a horrible price to be paid in trust in law enforcement. And the president seems to be attempting right now to make some course corrections. Whether it will be effective or not, I don't know.
We're hearing that Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino is being pulled out of Minneapolis. He was the one who, and I believe citing no evidence, suggested Alex Pretti intended to massacre federal agents. Talk to us, if you would, about the White House strategy here. What are they trying to do now?
Well, Tom Homan is a veteran, and I worked with Tom for the years that I was at Customs and Border Protection. He understands the system. When the shooting of Renee Good happened, he came out pretty quickly and said, let's wait and see what the investigation brings. The problem was that immediately the vice president, the president, and the secretary of Homeland Security all came out and immediately said she was a domestic terrorist and the shooting was completely justified. Unfortunately for Tom, he had to backtrack on his earlier statements. But now I think people clearly understand. And if there's a rift between himself and Secretary Kristi Noem, I think that's important to understand. The Wall Street Journal opinion page, one of our most conservative papers, as you well know, said that Kristi Noem and the Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, are not credible spokespersons in these incidents.
We should remind our viewers that Tom Homan is Donald Trump's border czar, and the White House has now sent Tom Homan to Minnesota. What do you think he needs to do there to restore trust?
Well, I think Tom will be open to meeting with the Minneapolis police chief, who has an excellent reputation, not only in Minneapolis, but across the country as the head of a large city police department. I think he'll meet with state investigative agents, and he'll meet with some political officials. I think there will be a significant winding down and turning down of the temperature by the officials that are still in Minneapolis.
We've seen ICE action not only in Minneapolis, in a variety of other places across America, in LA and Chicago, to name just a few. If you were still leading Customs and Border Protection today, what would you advise the US president to do to restore public trust nationally, across the nation?
Well, when Commander Bovino launched into Los Angeles and surrounded a park, a well-known park, and said, we're in charge here and this is the new normal, they marched into rock music. And I was asked, what would I have done if I was still the commissioner? And I said, I would have relieved Commander Bovino of all his responsibilities immediately. So I don't think that the Trump administration will have a lot of success bringing back any type of trust in ICE and really the Border Patrol. But if the Border Patrol is put back on the border, which is where they work, where they're experienced, they're not experienced to work in cities, in urban areas. If they go back on the border, and if ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement arm, targets those people that are gang members, drug dealers, have final orders of deportation, if they target them and not just walking through parking lots and convenience stores, taking people off, I think that will help.
Gil Kerlikowske, former Commissioner of US Customs and Border Protection. Thank you so much for joining us on DW today. We appreciate it.
And joining me now is Batya Ungar-Sargon. She's the host of her own program with the news outlet NewsNation. She is a political commentator known for her blunt analysis of American politics. Batya, it's good to have you back on the program. Well, here we are now talking about Minneapolis. It is at the center of a national confrontation over immigration enforcement, but it feels like it is something much bigger than just one city. What does Minneapolis represent right now in the country's larger political struggle?
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you and with your viewers. The thing that I think your viewers need to understand is that there is still broad support for the president's mass deportation agenda, but ICE, which was tasked with carrying it out, has lost a lot of support with the American people. What that means is that the same impetus that led Donald Trump to win the election, the feeling amongst the American people that millions and millions of illegal migrants poured across the border in the 4 years of Joe Biden's presidency, and that this cannot be allowed to stand and has to be rectified, that sentiment is still there. But a lot of the imagery is really making Americans feel bad about that. And so what the president is trying to do right now is to give them more of that agenda, more deportations, but with less of the chaos that really has been unfolding in Minneapolis specifically. And that is what we're going to see as the shift now. I don't think he's going to back off those deportations because that is what Americans voted for, but he's going to try to find a less chaotic way to actually give them that agenda.
You mentioned the images in this story, and obviously everyone right now talking about the video of the shooting death from last Saturday. There are discrepancies here. The official version as opposed to what people say they saw. What stands out to you about how this story has unfolded? I mean, what does it tell us about accountability when it comes to federal law enforcement?
I think that's a really important question. From everything I have read, Alex Pretti was a wonderful human being, and his death is horribly, horribly tragic. And the fact that the head of DHS came out and lied about what happened and lied about him in the immediate aftermath of the shooting and said that he was brandishing his weapon at law enforcement, that horrifies me. The lying about it, the desecration of the dead. Now, that said, I don't believe he was murdered. I think this is what we call a bad shoot, which is that it is a shooting that will be legally justified, albeit horrifically tragic. And I think the accountability question falls very much on this question of, can the American people still trust someone like Kristi Noem after she lied to our faces? To me, it's less about the agents themselves than about what has to be and what is unfolding as a shakeup in leadership so that the American people can trust the administration on this issue.
Yeah, I want to talk about Noem in just a moment, but in order to have this accountability, you need an investigation. And a few days ago, the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, he delivered a stinging indictment of the federal government when it comes to investigating shootings. Take a listen to what he said.
Minnesota's justice system will have the last word on this. It must have the last word. As I told the White House in no uncertain terms this morning, the federal government cannot be trusted to lead this investigation. The state will handle it, period.
But so we've got the governor there calling for impartial investigations into the shootings. Walz, is he doing what a governor should do in a crisis?
You'll forgive me if I don't believe that a person who has called ICE the Gestapo and compared criminal illegal migrants to innocent Jews like Anne Frank, if I think that that person is capable of doing an unbiased investigation into ICE. From the beginning, Tim Walz has simply taken up the temperature again and again and again, making these deeply offensive comparisons, especially to someone like me. Half of my family was murdered by the actual Gestapo. So I just think he's been really lacking in protecting both the ICE officers themselves, who he has refused to offer protection to, but also his own citizens, because his rhetoric has led to a lot of the violence and the unrest that we've seen in the streets. So I just don't have a lot of faith in him right now, I have to say.
Well, then how do you explain President Trump, in the last 24 hours, describing his latest phone conversation with Walz as very good and productive. I mean, that's a major turnaround, considering what we've been hearing from the White House regarding the governor of Minnesota. I mean, why this reversal?
I think it shows admirable maturity on the part of the president, that despite everything that's gone down, he truly is committed to taking down the temperature. It's a sort of rare thing to see from President Donald Trump. He's not known for this, but the agenda is very important to him, and being seen as on the side of law and order is very important to him. And I think that he understands that he has to meet the Democrats halfway if he wants to bring order back to the streets and if he wants to avert a shutdown. And I think those are really his two main agenda items right now.
What do you think about the president sending his border czar, Tom Homan, into Minnesota? Is he doing that because he's lost faith in the head of the Department of Homeland Security? I mean, what you were alluding to earlier, is that what we're seeing happen right now? He's moving in someone to do the job that he expected Noam to do.
I certainly hope so. I think he should fire her. I don't see how we can trust a word that comes out of her mouth after what just transpired. And Tom Homan, you will recall, even after the Renee Good shooting, another tragic shooting of somebody who was impeding ICE, Tom Homan refused to say whether it was justified or not. He said, I want to see more evidence. He's a consummate professional. He was awarded a medal by President Obama, you will recall. So I think that this was a really good move.
You know, Batya, we see from time and time again, it seems, in the United States, you've got one side that sees the necessity of law enforcement. The other side sees intimidation and abuse of power. But it almost seems too simple to have this binary read on the situation. I mean, is it really that black and white?
Whenever you have law enforcement engaging with people, unfortunately, tragically, there will always be mistakes. It's just a tragic, horrible thing. By and large, these people behave very professionally, and sometimes things go awry. I think the thing to keep in mind is that the majority of Americans want to see mass deportations. And of course, that is not going to be a simple thing to make happen. You can't just ask people to leave the greatest country on earth and think that they will line up and do so. And so, unfortunately, law enforcement has to enforce. And I think the president right now is trying to minimize the negativity around that and maximize the efficiency and try to bring us back together as Americans.
How should viewers distinguish between lawful protests and tactics that intentionally provoke confrontation? I mean, where do you think political leaders on both sides, where do you think they have failed to draw that line clearly?
You know, Alex Pretti, as I said, seems to have been a wonderful person, but to me, it seems that he was impeding law enforcement. He was doing that same directing of traffic that Renee Good was doing. They are trying to stop ICE from deporting people. That's not a protest. That is impeding law enforcement. A protest is when you show up and you have your say to the side. You make your voices known, but what they are trying to do is undermine the very agenda that got Donald Trump elected. And I think it's very important that we point out those differences. Now, of course, impeding law enforcement shouldn't be a death sentence. But when you get involved in an altercation with law enforcement and you have a gun on you, that frequently turns ugly, unfortunately and tragically.
There are reports that protest organizers are using the messaging app Signal to coordinate their actions. There are reports that FBI weapons have been stolen by protesters. How worried are you that Minneapolis is becoming a prelude to what could eventually morph into some domestic armed conflict? I mean, civil war in the United States. I mean, is your level of worry at that point now?
No, because we haven't seen the protests growing in numbers. We've seen them growing in extremism. in very specific located places. I think the vast majority of Americans are good-hearted people and see this as a tragedy, but not one that would justify a violent reaction. I think most Americans who disapprove of the president's agenda do understand that the place to express that disapproval is at the ballot box. I just don't see this growing into a mass protest movement. At the end of the day, there's above 80% support for deporting criminals, and there's 55-60% support for deporting every illegal migrant. And I think that there is a kind of broad consensus around what most Americans want to see. So I don't feel very worried that, God forbid, something could break out like civil war.
Let me just ask you this final question. If you were advising both President Trump and the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, right now, what would you tell them is the priority, the next step that should be taken in the next 24, 48 hours?
I think the governor should open all of the jails, all of the pretrial detention jails, hand over all of the criminals there, let the administration walk out with hundreds, thousands, however many are there, and call it a day. I think that would be a big victory for both sides.
Batya Ungar-Sargon, it's good to have you on the program. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you. Hope to see you again soon here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And for more, I'm joined now by Daniel Altman. He's a former Customs and Border Protection official. He served in both the first Trump and the Biden administrations. Mr. Altman, it's good to have you with us. You're the former head of internal investigations of the U.S. Border Police. With that in mind, let me ask you, how do you view how the shooting death of Alex Pretti has been handled so far? How would you have approached this case?
Yeah, first of all, Brent, thanks for having me. And I think first and foremost, the most important thing that we need to focus on in a time like this is making sure that evidence is secured and that a good and independent investigation is initiated. It's going to be really important to make sure that that investigation is properly focused, the proper agencies are involved in that investigation, and that the public has a good idea of what they can expect in terms of transparency on the back end of the investigation.
How confident are you that exactly what you were describing, that's going to happen?
Yeah, so there's a few things that are unclear right now. The first thing I think it's important to understand is the types of investigations that typically occur after an incident of this nature. And so you're going to have the agency, in this case, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, doing its own internal inquiry, which is administrative in nature, really taking a look to see if the agents that discharge their weapons followed agency policy. And then you're going to have a criminal investigation potentially run by the FBI and overseen by the Department of Justice, which would be responsible for determining whether or not there was any violation of law on the part of the agents who used force. And sometimes, especially if the individual on who the force was used is still alive, you would have a third investigation looking at that individual's conduct. What's unclear right now is exactly what the focus is of the FBI investigation. And whether the FBI, what we've heard is that the FBI is supporting Homeland Security investigations. And typically, Homeland Security investigations is not responsible for conducting civil rights inquiries or looking at a use of force by federal law enforcement. CBP has its own internal investigative unit. And so at this point, we need a little bit more information on what entities are doing the investigation and what the scope of that investigation is. And what I think ideally what we'd like to hear is that that the Department of Justice is taking a good look at whether or not there were any civil rights violations that occurred during this particular incident, and that also the agency is doing a really thorough look at the conduct of the officers. And it's important because in this instance, we have several of our constitutional rights are potentially impacted by what happened.
Well, looking at it from the outside, I mean, listening to you describe how many agencies could be involved and how many investigations could possibly happen, it seems like there may be a lot of potential here for things to be dropped, or for this case maybe just to quickly fade away into the past. Are you concerned that could happen?
I think it's important to remember, Brent, that there are really well-established protocols for this. And so when an incident of this nature happens, There are agencies who have primary responsibility. They respond. They have protocols in place. And so to a certain extent, we saw that happen at the beginning of this this particular incident was a little chaotic. At this point now, we should be getting a fairly clear explanation about exactly which agencies are investigating, what the scope of that investigation is, and what the public can expect in terms of transparency. And so I'm not particularly overwhelmed by the number of agencies involved. We're pretty used to that. We're just looking for a little more transparency on exactly what the investigations are and when we should expect to hear something.
Would transparency also include releasing the body cam footage of the ICE agents who were involved in last weekend's shooting death?
Yeah, and just to clarify, those are Border Patrol agents that are part of U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
Border Patrol, yeah.
And CBP does, absolutely. And CBP does routinely release body-worn camera related to agent and officer-involved shootings. In fact, if you go on the website, you can find a good number of those video releases. So I think it's reasonable to expect that the agency will likely decide to release the video. When they decide to release it is going to depend on a number of factors. Most importantly, whether the release of the video might interfere with any aspect of the investigation. It's really important that they talk to those agents and officers first before that video goes up, on the media, so that we get a really clean look at their recollections of what occurred. But I think looking at past history, it's very likely that CBP will ultimately release that video.
Okay, well, we will certainly be following the case, as I'm sure you will be and our colleagues in the United States will be doing as well. Daniel Altman, we appreciate you taking the time to share your insights with us tonight. Thank you.